Good morning. I would like to talk to you today about something that came up because we've had a ton of snow here. And what happens at my house when we get a lot of snow, like there was probably about 2 feet altogether, although not all at the same time. We had at least a foot of snow on the roof all at once, and then it starts to melt from the bottom up because of the heat of the house, and it slides down the roof like I don't know what, like a toboggan going down a hill, and then it curls over the edge of the roof. Sometimes far enough that, we're worried about our windows when the whole thing comes down. And I was looking at that and I was thinking, what is it that makes it curl like that? Like, why doesn't it just fall off the roof? How is it that there's this layer of kind of iciness, I think, curling it somehow, and then on the top, the snow on the top doesn't break open or crack or anything. It's just this lovely smooth field of snow on top, and it's all just like curling around. How does that work? And it's that kind of question that comes up to me a lot. I always wonder about why does this do this? Why does this do that? How does it work? And that's what makes me a scientist at heart. I love science. I'm not a materialist, and I don't subscribe to scientific materialism. But, it always seems to me that science was born of the question, why? Looking at the world in wonder and awe and saying, what's going on here? I want to understand this. Why does this happen? And as I was thinking about that this morning, it felt, kind of sad in a way, because science is doomed to never find the answers to why. Science only discovers how. It's brilliant at that. Don't get me wrong. Science is brilliant at discovering how. But it can never say the why. Why does gravity work? Why is a Jesus lizard designed so that it can run across the water instead of sinking into it like everything else would do? Why did woodpeckers' heads evolve so that they can basically blast their heads against a stump at high speeds for their entire lives and not get brain damage? And why? And here's the big one, like why does one cell turn into somehow miraculously an entire being, like an entire human or an entire whale? Or how does that work? Because we really want to know why, not just how. We've learned how. Science has told us the hows of all of these things and more. And there's not that many questions left in the world, I think, that science hasn't answered how. But it's still clueless when it comes to why. Why does a cell do that? Why does a cell evolve and change its program so that in the next incarnation, part of it becomes a bone cell, and part of it becomes a skin cell, and part of it becomes a nerve cell? And, science is blinded by its own belief system that says if something can't be measured, it doesn't exist. It's not real. That's materialism. And measurement is, by definition, an extension of our own senses, which are limited in themselves. You know, our senses only perceive this tiny little spectrum of reality in a certain way, you know, translated by our brains in a certain way. So that very idea of measurement and perception is flawed, and proven flawed by science now. You know, even science shows that it's not valid. That's not a valid belief system. And yet we have a few hundred years of scientific process and tradition carrying this idea forward against all evidence. For instance, I think it was sometime in the 1800s, they did a test. I'm not good with details. Trivia is not my thing. But there was a couple scientists who wanted to test for the ether. And they came up with quite an ingenious way of doing it. And they tested, and they found nothing. So they said, okay, categorically we can say ether doesn't exist. It's just a fiction, it's a myth. Well, fast forward to, I think it was the late 1900s, like late in the last century. Another couple scientists redid the same experiment, this time with equipment that is much more sensitive than what they had back in the 1800s. Lo and behold, they found the proof that the ether does exist. Except now, because the word, because ether was so discredited in science, you can't say it in a scientific circle with any credibility anymore. So they don't call it ether anymore. They call it the field, for instance. That's probably the most common. So the field exists. We know that now. It connects everything in existence. It's everywhere. It's the medium through which things happen. All those things that they used to say about the ether. So did the ether not exist because we couldn't measure it, and then suddenly it existed because we could? There's a certain aspect of the new sciences that would say, yeah, that's possible, but more likely is the fact, or more reasonable, is the fact that we have more ability to measure in finer detail than they had when they first did the experiment. So it's flawed by its very essence, at the basis of the scientific method is a fundamental flaw that limits it from discovering the answers that it really wants to know, like to the big mysteries. Why are we here? Who are we? How did we get here? Why is there life? Fundamentally, what's that all about, right? Why is there life? And I was thinking about how in the Eastern tradition, there are answers to those things. In the spiritual traditions of all cultures, there are answers. We have the answers to why. Some of them, most of them are metaphorical. We'll come up with stories that explain it in a way that the mind and the culture of the day can understand. But at its core, we do understand why. Spirituality tells us why. And spiritual geniuses, sages, saints, that's my cat, if you can hear that in the background running around. They have another way, another kind of science. They have a direct perceptional science. In other words, they don't think and test and prove. They go out right into the source field, into the Akashic field of all knowledge, or the cosmic mind, or the overmind, or whatever you want to call it. And they just find the answers there. They just download them. And that's becoming something, happily, that's more accessible to all humans now as we come into this more spiritual age, and we've built up a certain momentum with a certain number of people doing this, kind of the 100th monkey thing, but more the morphic field thing. We're coming into an era where we can all do more of that. We can all just find the answers by opening up and downloading them. And, I was thinking about that. I was thinking, why is it that we went this whole scientific route? And I think it's because religion in the West shut us down from direct connection with wisdom, with God. Religion, kind of by definition, separates us from divinity and instead places a whole bunch of rules around divinity, rules around what it means, and tenets around how to interact with it. And it all became secondhand. We had to go through a priest, who had to go through depending on the system, a bishop, and then a pope or whatever. There are layers of hierarchy of who actually knew what God was thinking, right? Instead of just the innate human birthright of all of us being able to interact with the divine directly and get that information directly. And in the East, and before, the Kali Yuga age, really, they never had to do that because they always had the answers. They had direct knowledge. They couched it in metaphors like Indra's net or grandmother spider's web of life. But they have said what science is now finally being able to experiment and experience through the senses and the measurements that science loves so much. And so here we are, right? Think about this. How is it that we are here at this time where science and spirituality are proving each other's accuracy, are proving the truth of each other? I think that's the most incredible thing. It's that's the ultimate breaking down of the barriers and the false separations, I think, in a lot of ways. It's erasing the division between ego and soul, between mind and heart. And I find that so exciting. What a wonderful time to be living. What a blessing that we are here to experience this at this time. So that's really all I wanted to share with you today, were these thoughts and this joy. And, see if you can't take that out into your day with awareness of what science tells us and what spirit tells us, and how those two things are becoming inseparable, how they are merging into the same beautiful story of existence and the great mysteries of why. And with that, I will leave you to your day, and I will chat with you again tomorrow. Have a lovely one. Blessed be.